Yakoke. Sahochifo Steven Charleston. Chatasia Micha Episcopal Bishop Sia Keenley. Holy So Four Vision Quests of Jesus. Chata Hina Sipokni Iali. Micha Jesus Hatak Sia. Hello, my name is Steven Charleston. I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation. I'm also an Episcopal bishop. I follow the old way, Hina Sipokne, the old path, the traditional way, Chata Yakne, of the Chata people, Chata Okla, Chata Yakne, of our people and of our land. But I'm also Atakosh and also Jesus Hatak. I'm a Jesus man. I wrote the book, The Four Vision Quests of Jesus. Hosh, Anompalili, Ilapat. That's what I've come to talk to you about. I begin this way in order to welcome you into this moment with me to talk about spiritual things, to talk about Jesus, to talk about Christian theology, but in a different way than you may have heard it expressed before. That's why I wanted to begin by speaking to you in my own language, the Chata language of my people. My people originally are from what today is called the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. We were removed from those territories in 1831 into what is currently now the state of Oklahoma. Oklahoma in our language means Okla is people, Homa is red. We named it a land for the red people because we knew that there would be more refugees who would soon be joining us in that territory, and certainly there were. And I've come from that background that I'm proudly a part of as a traditionalist Native person and as a person raised in my own culture and my own world and language, to talk to you about the Christian faith, because as I say, I'm also an Episcopal bishop, and I've been, as Cliff said, I've been teaching for a very long time in seminaries. Over 40 years, I've been a professor. I was president and dean of one of our seminaries in Cambridge, and so a bishop of Alaska. So my experience is broad. I was the native, I guess you'd call it staff officer for the Episcopal Church, which allowed me to visit every reservation and native community, urban as well as rural, in both the United States and Canada. And as well, I've met with indigenous peoples in South America, Mexico, Fiji Islanders, the Maori, Aborigines of Australia. So I have quite a broad experience in talking about and in dealing with indigenous spiritualities and indigenous cultural forms of religion. That could be a very boring talk if I'm not careful, because that sounds very academic and it sounds like it's an awful lot of territory to cover. When I wrote my little book, The Four Vision Quests of Jesus, what I was trying to do is to tell that story, but to do it in a way that was more simple, more direct, more personal. In that book, what I've tried to write had to be a mixture of things, because I cannot assume that all of you have honored me by coming today necessarily are that familiar with all of these different native cultures or of all their histories and stories, much less to think that you might know what my version of Christian theology would be like. So I had to write a book that incorporated all of those elements, a bit of culture, a bit of history, a bit of theology, and try and write it in a way that would make sense to people and grab their attention. Because Cliff's right, I am sort of like a missionary in reverse, coming now out into the world to try and help people understand, the depth of what Native American Christian theology is really trying to say. And in the beginning of my book, I try and express that by letting people know that my understanding of this subject is I'm not talking about dressing up Western European Christian theology with a little bit of buckskin and feathers. My goal is not to try and put some makeup on Christianity so it looks a little more native. I'm talking about a very different, perhaps even for some of you, more radical approach. Let me try and introduce this subject to you with this simple question. Do you believe that God is the God of all times, all places, and all people? Yes or no? Yes. Most of you, I'm glad you said that, most of you who are either Christian or Jewish or monotheists would say, well, yes. God is not for us the God of a particular river, a particular mountain, or a particular people. God is universal. Well, that's good. So the next question follows. What do you think God was doing in North America during centuries of my ancestors' life in this part of the world? Was God here? Or was God the absentee landlord of North America? Sort of owned it but never showed up. It was a bad neighborhood. If God did show up here, what was God doing? Was God hiding from the native indigenous peoples of North America? In other words, God would reveal God's self to some people in the Middle East but sort of hid out and didn't want to talk to people in this part of the world? That doesn't sound like God. God takes the initiative, right, to speak to us, to interact with us. What was God doing here? Was God lying to my people? Making up stories, seeing if the sort of silly or dumb Indians might actually buy this idea? No, God doesn't lie. God speaks the truth. God was here. God was here revealing God's self. Listen. Revealing God's self over thousands of years to my ancestors. As my ancestors related to God, tried to understand God, tried to communicate with God, tried to receive messages from God, that living presence of God in the story, in the history, in the spiritual tradition of my people was as vibrant and as real as it was among any other people on the face of this planet. What does that tell us? It tells us something amazingly important, I think. And that is that when we begin to look at the Christian faith, and we assume that the Christian faith arises from a particular covenant among a particular people in a particular time in history, and we freeze frame that reality into that one narrow historical frame, we do a great disservice to the deeper, richer, broader meaning of what the Christian faith is all about. There's more than one Old Testament. That's the starting point. When I say Old Testament today, as a professor, I don't use that term very much, only in a sort of historical way, because today it sounds pejorative to say someone's story is old. So we prefer to say it's the Hebrew covenant. But it's what we used to call, when I was younger, and perhaps in your experience, the Old Testament. And you know what the Old Testament is. It's Exodus and Genesis and Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all of that. What's in that? What are in those books that we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew covenant? Well, there's poetry, isn't there? The poetry of the Psalms. There's history, kings, the history of the famous people. There's prophecy, isn't there? The prophecy of Isaiah and Jeremiah. That's part of the story, isn't there? There's stories of famous men and famous women. There are even little proverbs, aren't there? Interesting little witticisms. Don't cry over spilt milk, that kind of thing. What is an Old Testament? It's a collection of a people's living memory of their encounter with God over what? Thousands of years, passed down and told and retold in all of these different forms. Prophecy, poetry, history. There's no magic here. There's no mystery here. That's what's in the first books of the Bible. So if you take that as a definition for what a people's story, their covenant, their Old Testament is, and apply it to my ancestors, you honestly come up with pretty much the same thing. What is Native American spirituality supposed to be anyway? It's been misused, I believe, in many ways, but if you drill down to the core of what we're trying to talk about with Native American spirituality, Native American tradition, Native American religion, Native American culture, what you're getting is that same amalgamation of different elements. Our proverbs, our prophecies, our memories of famous people, our religious leaders who stood out in the people's mind, our visions, our poetry, our dance, our music. It's our Old Testament. It is the collected, combined memory of my ancestors in their centuries-old encounter with God. Did my ancestors get it completely right in the way that they understood God? Well, there's some liberal folks who, God bless them, would like to think so. And they're very kind to Native people. And they go, oh, the Native people are so spiritual and so wonderful. And they love the buffalo and the trees and the animals. And they're the poster children for the environment. And I'm very grateful for that. Thank many of you who actually think that we were that nice. We weren't. We're human beings. We put our pants on one leg at a time just like every other group of people on the planet. No, we didn't always get it right. We didn't always get it wrong. We got it. Did the Hebrew people always get it right? No, because if they did, what do we need Jesus for? Right? So no, we as Christians think, no, they didn't get it right. Did they get it all wrong? No. Jesus said, not one little bit of them. I'm not denigrating even a dot of the law here. I want you to understand that. I've come to fulfill it, not to deny it. So, when we come to people's Old Testaments, we come to a reality that there's a mixture of things in all of these stories. Some of them need to have our examination, and we need to rethink some of these things. Other things that came from our ancestors are wonderful and deeply spiritually moving and informative for us. The starting point to understand the four-vision quest of Jesus, the starting point to understand my kind of teaching about a Christian theology, is to begin here in our original covenant and to take it with the same critical attitude, the same informed, intelligent attitude, the same also, listen, degree of faith that we would accord to any other person's Old Testament. Because, brothers and sisters, there are several, many. Is there an Old Testament in Asia? Is there an Old Testament in Africa? Yes, of course. There are many people's memories. So we take the native memory and we look at it in its context and begin to try and understand, what does it tell us about the Christian faith? Can you authentically read the New Testament of Jesus if you'd never picked up the original Hebrew covenant? Fascinating. If you'd never read Exodus, Kings, Jeremiah, Isaiah, never read it, never heard of it. All you had dropped from heaven was the New Testament of Jesus, and you picked it up as a Native American and started reading it. Would it make sense? Yes. Fascinating. Yes. Why? Well, first of all, because there's so much in our tradition that is resonant with what was in the Hebrew tradition. When I was a student, one of my first experiences in a seminary was sitting in a class on the Psalms, and the professor in those days, who was the dean of the seminary, well-renowned person in this area of study and the Psalms, began his talk to us saying that the Psalms arose from an experience that was unique. That in fact the experience of ancient Israel was different from that of anyone else on the planet. Because in a time, he told us, when other societies worshipped a pantheon of gods, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, when they had many different deities, Israel alone was unique in its monotheistic interpretation of God. And I remember sitting in that class going, no, they weren't. It was such an odd experience to be a native kid in a seminary listening to that profound statement, which was taken at face value by everyone. And me wanting to raise my hand and saying, no, excuse me, sir, wait, there's another group over here that felt that way. In Native America's Old Testament, in our covenant, we believe there was one God, the Creator. Think about this, listen. We believed that God had called us to become the chosen people of God. Sound familiar? Why did we use that term? Why do Native American nations in North America almost universally, if you wanted to know what their name means, my chata, when I say chatasia, I'm chata. What am I actually saying in my own language? I'm one of the human beings. I'm one of the people. I'm one of the chosen ones. The people chosen by God. Chosen by God in what way? Chosen by God to live in Chiatiyakne, the promised land. Sound familiar? To live in the Holy Land. Naniwaya, Chiatiyakne Naniwaya was the sacred place of my people. This is where God had called us after, now listen, I'm not making this up, after we had gone on a long exodus, a long migration, led through the wilderness by two twin brothers who carried in front of the people the staff of life. And every evening it was planted in the middle of our encampment, and every morning it pointed to the east, telling us to continue the migration from the great water that was in the west, the Pacific Ocean, walking across the desert lands, continually going east till we came to Chiatiyakne, Mississippi, to Naniwaya, the high holy place where we planted the staff into the earth, and the next morning it had suddenly begun to flower. And that became the promised land. That was where God made us a people. And we entered into covenant with God. We now would always honor and obey God and live a spiritual life in this land and care for it, for we were stewards of the promised land of God. Oh my goodness. Now that sounds so much like the experience that I was hearing in that class that I couldn't help but resonate with it and say, but there's a different story. There's another story. And yes, from the basis of my story, my people's story, you could easily pick up the New Testament and begin to understand it. The 4 vision quests of Jesus is one way that I tried to illustrate how you could read the New Testament from the native perspective. Understanding that the figure of Jesus could be interpreted from our tradition, not with a great stretch of the imagination, not trying to shoehorn Christian theology into native tradition or deny native tradition to give primacy of place to Christianity. That you could, in fact, begin to understand the two traditions relating to each other and working together in a very seamless fashion. Pardon me. So, how can I illustrate that? I did it with my focus on the 4 vision quests. But I also did it in a way that was very personal to me. Because the book begins with a true story about vision. And that's where I wanted to start, the idea of vision and a quest for a vision. Many of you have heard of a Native American vision quest. Some of it's benign and some of it's very good. And some of it can be a little bit strange because there are people now who actually sell the vision quest to others, sort of a new agey kind of a thing where we'll give you your power animal and you'll have a spirit helper, and for only $500 we'll take you out to a camp and you can experience the vision quest and all that. I'm talking about a traditional native understanding of what it means to be on a quest for God. And there's a little difference between the European understanding of a quest for God and the native understanding. In fact, all peoples around the world, as Joseph Campbell reminded us, have had the experience of the quest for the holy and the sacred. It's not unique, it's generic to all of us. The form that it took in the West began to lead in a certain direction. More and more it began to lead toward the understanding of the special person who would go on the quest. That's where Europeans created the beautiful poetry of the Arthurian legends. You had to be a knight in shining armor, pure of heart, poetically beautiful, willing to face danger alone. You know the stories, to go out for the Holy Grail, and you might find it if only you knew where it was and what it would be. And somewhere damsels and dragons might appear, all kinds of wonderful poetic images. But it was as Campbell said in one of his books, it was the hero with the 1,000 faces, the heroic search. The difference in Native America was, we had a quest too, but it didn't turn heroic, interestingly enough. In our culture, the idea that a person would go and quest for God became quite common. It's a little different take on it. We never lost the idea that, in fact, anyone could go on a vision quest. You should go on a vision quest. You were encouraged to go. A little bit like I was making a joke at dinner last night saying, when I was a little boy, I grew up in rural Oklahoma in a very fundamentalist evangelical community where you got baptized about the time you were 12. And my family teasing me, poking me, saying, isn't it about time you got Jesus in your heart? You're 12 years old, for gosh sakes. You're supposed to be getting into this. Same thing in Native tradition. When you got to a certain age, your parents and grandparents would start bugging you, when are you going to do the vision quest? It's time you went out on your quest. The quest is the most wonderfully audacious thing in Native tradition, in our covenant. Because it meant that unlike a generic understanding of God where God takes the initiative, this time the human being is taking the initiative. You're going out for no other reason than to meet the creator of the universe. Wow. Every human being had equal access to that adventure. That's a different kind of culture. You were expected to go out and stand there before God and go crying for your vision until you received a message from the holy, from the sacred. You were supposed to do what, in fact, in the West, only a handful of people could do, and in the Bible, only a very few people could do. One of them was Jesus. So imagine you're living in a culture now where that's an expectation. What does it mean? What kind of quest are you on? It is a quest in which there are 4 basic parts to it. 1, preparation. You don't just decide, hey, I think this afternoon I'll go out and find God. It is something you have to prepare for. To prepare yourself for it takes a lot of time and energy. Any of you ever heard of a sweat lodge? Do you know what the sweat lodge experience is? It's a purifying thing. It's like a hut covered originally with skins, now usually with canvas, very hot stones like in a sauna placed in the center. Everyone inside. There's a men's sweat lodge and a women's sweat lodge. The 2 different sweat lodges, it's very much the same thing. The women and men go in. They're naked. They're in the dark. It's like the womb of the mother. There's chanting and prayer. You come out, you feel reborn. It's part of the purification. When you prepare yourself, it's a purification. It's that kind of intense, focused meditation, prayer life. Sometimes it's like Lent. People in Native communities would give up. They would be celibate for a long time. They wouldn't eat certain foods. They would pray constantly. Lots of disciplines involved in a quest. And the second thing is, it involved a community. It wasn't a solo flight. There are no Lindberghs, so to speak, spiritually going on their quest in Native America. You need the support and the advice of who? Your elders. You need wisdom. You need guidance. You need older people who understand the path, who've been there and who will help you. The third aspect of a quest for Native people, it's a challenge. A Native vision quest can go up to, say, 4 days. It can be less than that, but it could be up to 4 days, where you're sitting in a round little circle on a high butte or a mountaintop by yourself every day, every night for 4 days with no food and no water. Why are you doing that? Sounds pretty daunting. That's the point. It's a challenge. And he went into the wilderness for how long? Without food or water. It's that same thing in Native America, that stretching of the person, that going to the limit. That is, the more that you deny yourself the everyday creature comforts, even a glass of water, the more you become aware of how important all of that is in your life. The more you come down to the most fundamental understandings that you're water. You kind of drill it down from all of that. Yes, of course, I know God and I understand the higher theology, and yeah, that's fine unless you're thirsty for 3 days. You don't know how many PhD professors there are that would be singing a different tune after 4 days with nothing to eat, sitting outside all day and all night, under the sun and the cold wind at night. You understand? There's a sort of a cleansing, a sort of a crystallizing of what that means, a coming to an awareness that's very deep and profound. And the last element of a vision quest, from our viewpoint, is what we call, the word to translate, as close as I think it can be translated, is lament. You don't go out there with your sense of self so inflated that you believe that God owes you a favor to show up. You go out there with an enormous sense of humility, with a sense of your own fragile brokenness. Going out there to cry out to God, literally crying like a child, oh please, please. There's a parental imagery here that's an undercurrent, listen, an undercurrent in our understanding of the quest, that you're going out almost seeking your parental figure, your mommy or your daddy, and Jesus called God Abba. What's the word Abba mean? Daddy. Daddy. Mommy. Hear that echo from a butte in South Dakota, crying for the vision, humblechea, crying out for God to come. The lament, the Buddha said, is really the first of the Four Noble Truths. Any of you familiar with the Buddha? Very important to me. I'm sort of like, if you were Episcopalian, if you scratch me hard enough, I'm a little native, I'm a little Christian, and a little Buddhist. Try it, it won't hurt you. Trust me, it's okay. And the Buddha said, the beginning of the Four Noble Truths is, no, not suffering. If you translate it from the Sanskrit, it's a broader meaning, dukkha. It means it is a little lament, it's a little lost chances, it's a little pain, it's the great sigh of who we are as human beings. It's getting older. It's losing what you thought your way was. It's just who we are as people. We're fragile. You put those four elements together into a vision quest. Then you're understanding what a quest is. And from that quest, you begin to see that there is a visionary experience possible for you, for all of us. That if you'll simply pay attention and work at it like that, you can do some miraculous and amazing things. I went on one of my very first quests on the top of a building in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because I had nowhere else to go, and I was upset and full of lament. It was 1973, and God is Red had been published by Vine Deloria Jr., who basically said in those heady days of the civil rights movement, of the American Indian movement, if you're a real Indian, get out of Christianity. Because Christianity was nothing more than the chaplaincy to the 7th Cavalry. And where you really belong is in the old traditional ways of faith. And I was so confused and so shaken by that I began my lament. I began going under a roof of an apartment building every morning, drawing a circle on the ground with cornmeal, acknowledging the four sacred directions, looking to God above me and the Mother below me, saying, come and help me. Because I'm in seminary to become a priest. What do you want me to do? I'm also native. Everything that AIM talked about, I was there. My sister was one of the crazy Indians who took over Alcatraz. We've got no reason to doubt which side I'm on. I was raised that way. I know my history, I know my people, I know the language. But what about my faith? Many of more progressive Christians think, oh, the missionary movement, terrible, bad, all missionaries, no, that was so awful. Again, as a teacher, I'm asking you to be balanced in your thinking. Were there bad missionaries? Yes, there were. And were there missionaries who were noble people? Yes, there were. Like Bishop Whipple in Minnesota, who saved hundreds of Dakota men from the biggest mass execution in American history when he appealed to Abraham Lincoln to commute their sentences. Not such a bad guy after all. But when you're in this moment when you're trying to understand your whole spiritual self and you're being pulled apart, in a way, what I was spiritually coming unglued was there was no Four Vision Quest of Jesus book in those days. It was either or for me. And that was true all across America in Native communities where you either had to stick with Christianity or you had to get away from it and be traditional, and the two sides weren't talking to each other. And our community was continuing to be colonized by having its spiritual center pulled apart. And I went on my lament, I went on a vision quest, and I had a vision. You'll read it in the book. And the vision is so funny. Because unlike the vision I talk about in the book, some of you may remember Black Elk Speaks. Any of you who've ever read Black Elk Speaks, you get this vision that Hollywood would really love to try and do with CGI. I mean, there's giant teepees, there's rainbows, there's dancing ponies, there's just a plethora of buffalo. It's an amazing vision that Black Elk had. Me, I got a bird. That's it. I have always been something of a spiritual underachiever. I got a bird. But it was an important bird. It was a crow. And the crow is the bird that brought the corn to my ancestors, the Chata people, and taught us how to live. The crow came to me and spoke to me in a vision on that roof all those years ago and basically gave me a very simple message. I like to say many of us want a vision like you get in a movie, but we don't always get it. Maybe there are some people who actually hear that voice of God, "Go then therefore, Cliff, unto the Hebrewites and tell them on." No, I don't get that. I get a very simple, it's like my mother or grandmother putting my face in her hand saying, "Read my lips, Steve. Here's the message. Remember this." And the message was very simple. There is two paths to follow, but one path to find. Be patient. That was it. Because of that message, I stayed in seminary, I graduated, I didn't get ordained, I went out into the Dakotas, figuring that I would try to be both Christian and Native and honor both at the same time. And not because of some crazy thing that old missionaries did, but because, quite honestly, unlike what Vine had written in his book, there were no evil missionaries that came to my people. We asked Christians to show up. We were a people that were very curious, religiously speaking. We were sort of like, I told Cliff last night, if the Hopi people of the Mesas in the Southwest were like Orthodox Christians with a very ornate theology and a rich kind of liturgical life, my people were more like Quakers. We were very plain, but very intellectually interested in everything, always arguing and studying. We had like rabbis instead of priests. It was that kind of culture. So we heard about Christianity. We invited the Christians to come tell us your story. And when it matched to ours so perfectly, we said, hey, no problem. We understand. We began to print the Bible in Choctaw. We sang in Choctaw. We had hymnals in Choctaw. And when we went on the Trail of Tears, when we were despoiled by other Christians, we were a Christian nation being robbed of our land by other Christians. And when we were force-marched on a death march called the Trail of Tears, and 1/4 of my people died to go to Oklahoma, we sang hymns along the way and buried our dead under the sign of the cross. And the first thing we did when we got to Oklahoma was build churches. And like other refugees, like the African Americans who came and were put on our land to work in the plantations, just like African American slaves, we looked to Christianity in our deepest hours of need for consolation and support. We did not see it as an invading force destroying us. It's what held us together. So I come into this conversation from that viewpoint. How could I be both? The vision of the crow said, hold on to both. It's a mistake to choose either or. Keep working at it. Because in the Chata tradition, to be a spiritual person, you have to keep working at it. Vision doesn't fall on you like special effects in a movie. Vision grows within you, within who you are, within what you think, with how you were raised, with your whole life story. It grows like a seed from within you. And every day that you pay attention to your spiritual life, listen, every day that you are focused on your spiritual life and know your own story and know your history and are open to the elders, you grow and you change and you evolve and you gain wisdom and understanding. It was when I was on the reservation in Standing Rock in South Dakota, having gone out into the native communities to try and find a deeper understanding. Still a layperson, not ordained, working on the reservations. It was there when I was reading the Gospel of Matthew that voice, about 4 years later, came back to me, quite unexpectedly. And not on a butte, not on a high holy place, sitting in an armchair reading the Bible. I was just sitting in an armchair in my house in Wakpala, South Dakota, reading the Bible, and the voice of God came to me and said, "You've just read the first vision quest of Jesus, the native Messiah." And I was stunned because I hadn't heard that voice since the voice told me, "Be patient and wait. The two paths will become one." And when I read the first vision quest of Jesus, it was as though it was a revelation. And I remember that afternoon so clearly because I began to read all of Matthew as quickly as I could to see what else I could discover, because suddenly that Bible opened up to me, that New Testament, not as a Western European gift to my people, but as something that grew out of my ancestors' own tradition. That vision quest was there. It was the story of Jesus in the wilderness. He went through a time of preparation, yes. He went supported by others, yes. Angels were there to support and guide and nurture him in his vision quest. He went to face a challenge, 40 days and 40 nights, yes. And was tempted, yes. A deep challenge. And with a lament, yes, with a lament for all of humanity, crying out in the middle of the wilderness, "You must worship God." It was as though the native Messiah I suddenly saw coming alive out of those pages, as real as any Chata, as any Lakota, as any Arapaho or Shoshone. Not made up to be an Indian version of a European understanding. And I kept reading, and the other vision quests appeared to me, and they came through loud and clear. They're in the little book, but I can tell you what they are. The second one is what we call the Transfiguration. Was there a time of preparation? Yes, his ministry. He'd been working hard trying to understand more and more about who he was. He went up to a high holy place. Yes, exactly, in the native tradition. He had his friends and supporters with him. James, Peter, and John, right? And did he have a vision? Was it a challenge? Yes. A vision so bright others could see it. And a vision that was profound. For who stood by him? His elders, Elijah and Moses. The elders of the tribe of Israel, standing there with him. As a native person, I thought, this makes perfect sense. And what was the lament? The lament came from the very voice of God. Because when Peter wanted to do the Western thing, let's build a big institution and keep God to ourselves, then what we used to call in our tradition the great mystery, which is always this cloud comes down over the high holy place, and the voice of God offers the lament. "This is my child, listen to him." It was perfectly there. The third vision quest in Gethsemane. In Gethsemane, same story. Did he have friends who went with him? Yes. Was it a time he'd prepared for? Yes, he had prepared to go there. He went to Gethsemane. His friends were there. Did he face a challenge? The biggest he'd faced to date. Absolutely. It was a good day to die for Jesus. He faced the good day to die. And yet when he turned around to try and share that profound moment with his supporters, what were they doing? They were asleep. They were asleep. And what was his lament? "Oh God, really? Take this cup away if you can. I'm going to have to do this and do it alone." And the final vision quest is Golgotha. The final vision quest is Golgotha, the last of the high holy places, where, surrounded only by the women, he goes to this high and lonely place to face his ultimate trial after all of they've been through in the preparation for that moment, and then the great vision of his life and of all of ours. The four sacred vision quests of Jesus can be read and understood strictly from the covenant of native peoples, without any need to say that we're making this up or trying to shoehorn it in. It's there for anyone who wants to read it. Now listen, I don't want to bore you with this, and I don't want to talk too long, but I'll give you a quick understanding of why this is so important to me, because when you read it from the native viewpoint, it does come out differently. I don't want to fool you. It is a little bit different. Here's one of them. In the Transfiguration, you're dealing with an almost Hopi-like understanding of vision, which is a scientific vision of the wholeness of the creation and of the universe that the Hopi people understood centuries before Westerners did. When in Hopi tradition, it speaks about the north and the south pole of a globe that spins around, that holds everything in equilibrium, and that we live on a round planet held together by electromagnetic forces that move through the earth scientifically. You're talking about Hopi spiritual tradition, which the Spanish, who despoiled the Hopi and tried to destroy their community, had no clue of, and thought the earth was still just this very flat kind of world in which these scientific principles meant nothing. And in the vision of the Transfiguration, you recapture that sense from the Hopis of what this perfect shining equilibrium of the meaning of the native Messiah is, to return us to balance with creation, to hold us into an equilibrium that if we do not maintain, we will, as the Hopis and other southwestern prophecies tell us, spin out of control and lose the earth, which is the precious gift of God. It is God incarnate. Why is it God incarnate? Because there are no distinctions between the animate and the inanimate in Native America. But science tells us, well, finally, science catches up with the Hopis, and what does it tell us? It tells us that most of the planet is inanimate, incapable of feeling, and therefore nothing but natural resources, and what's the other famous phrase? Raw materials that we can use. And what do those stones of the earth represent in native tradition? Our most ancient ancestors. Why are they not inanimate but animate? Because there is nothing in all of creation created that is not created by God, and if created by God, infused with the presence of God, because it comes from, as the Hopis say, from the mind of God. Even before the word was spoken was the thought. And the moment God envisioned a creation, God infused that creation with all of her love and all of her presence, and therefore even in the most humble stone of the earth is the living presence of the great Mother herself. Which is why we emerged from the earth. Why in the Southwest traditions we came out from the womb of the earth, and why the Kiva tradition, some of you may know about, these underground worship centers, are still so important, because they embody that vision of the Transfiguration, of humanity as the children of God living with other living creatures in balance and harmony, because we're all related. We're all in kinship. Here's another one. In the garden, was he being asked to die by God because of your sin? When I was a little boy, I would have answered that very quickly. Absolutely. Why did Jesus die on the cross? He died for your sins, and not for yours alone, but for everybody. You're a pretty messed up group. You're all very sinful. So God, because you're so horrible, had to come down into human form and be nailed to a cross and die in agony because of you. I believe that. Some of you did too. Some of you may still believe that. If you do, God bless you. But in the native tradition, there's no original sin. How are you going to read the Bible if there's no original sin? The whole concept of the thing is based on the understanding, isn't it, that we were so sinful? But what if we weren't so sinful? What if the garden was not first man and first woman? Yes, we had those stories too. but that they did something terribly, terribly wrong, or the woman did something terribly wrong. What if the woman never did anything terribly wrong? What if she and the man were in fact very happy, and all the creatures of the earth were helping them to learn how to live like that crow who brought me my food as a chata? Thank you. It was a different story. So what's going on in the Garden of Gethsemane? Why did Jesus have to die? I don't know if you've ever heard of the sun dance. The sun dance was forbidden until 1978. It was forbidden because the sun dance among the plains people is a sacrificial dance. It is where blood is literally spilled. Skewers, little sticks, are placed through the flesh on the chest of the men who are dancing. And as they pull back from it, the flesh tears and there's blood. Sacrifice, ladies and gentlemen, is a part of religions around the world. And the concept of what a sacrifice involves and embodies, whether it is the self-flagellation of Iranian Muslims, or it is Filipino Christians letting them be nailed on crosses, or it's Julian of Norwich being walled up in a little room where she gets no light and she lives by herself, or Gandhi who starves himself to death. It's nothing new, the idea of sacrifice. But the sacrifice that's going on in the garden, in the third vision quest of Jesus for us as natives, is not about a blood atonement for the sin of another person. It is instead about a sacrifice like a sun dancer makes for the sake of the whole nation and of the whole people. Listen carefully. The idea of this sacrifice is that Jesus understood that in order for him to become what only he could do, which is to make a sacrifice of self so deeply and so broadly that it reached out around the world to every living person, he had to do the one thing that no native would ever want to do, and it wasn't die. Because we were historically not anxious about death. In the book, I quote Tecumseh, who gives this wonderful thing about, what do you mean be afraid of death? There's no reason to be afraid of death. Go to your death just like we Christians say, singing hallelujah. Does that sound familiar to some of you Episcopalians? It is even at the edge of the grave we make our hallelujah. It is your good day to die. Jesus knew this was his good day to die, and he wasn't afraid of it. In our tradition, what he was afraid of was what it was going to cost him, and what it was going to cost him was something worse than death for a native person, and that's exile. You need to understand that the very core of our covenant had nothing to do with the individual. For we are not a community, a history, a tradition in which rugged individualism counts for anything. That's a very terrible thing for us. Everything we do, when I say, Chatasiya, of the people am I am one of the tribe of the human beings. I only have validity, only have a sense of self based on my communion with other human beings. There is no sense that you should be a rugged individualist, making it on your own, going your own way. If you're removed from the community, that's the worst punishment you can receive. In Chata tradition, we didn't have corporal punishment like death because people would choose that. We had exile because that's the worst thing that could happen. You cease to be. You go from matter to antimatter, from being to non-being. You enter the void. You go into a blackness, into an emptiness, into a space in which you just have the universe with nothing in it. All the lights go out. That's what I mean. Just an empty void. The only way that Jesus could fulfill this last vision quest is to go into that void, to risk obliteration and annihilation as a Chata or as an Indian, a native person, to risk losing everything. And why? Because, as we learn in the fourth vision quest, Jesus was trying to reach something that must be reached before the crucifixion can make sense. The fourth vision quest. Did you notice in the first vision quest, the helpers of the vision were angels? The Katsina, or Kachinas, as you may have heard them. These are figures, holy figures, spirit helpers. In the second and third vision quest, there are men in appearance. Elijah, Moses, Peter, James, John. In the fourth vision quest, there are no men. Fascinating. There are no men. Makes perfect sense for us. In the book, I talk about the role of Native women and how Native women have been denigrated by the term squaw. And I use images like Pocahontas and Sacagawea. And I talk about the role of women, spiritually speaking, that could not be squaws in our tradition because all things must be held in kinship and balance, a core article of faith for our covenant. Therefore, the balance between men and women must be constantly maintained. The role of women in the fourth vision quest is not by accident. They are not there as handmaidens to the Lord. They're not there to pick up after the Last Supper. They're not there because of any other reason than that the men could not be there. Only the power of the woman, only the power of the life, and I'm not talking just about the birth power of women. I'm talking about the spiritual integrity of women. I'm talking about the intellectual integrity of women. I'm talking about the pride, the presence, the place, the voice, the vision, the courage, the dignity, the essence of what it means to be a woman had to be there. The women were there, the men were conspicuous by their absence. And the women were there in all the gospel stories, and they were there to provide this illuminous moment when what occurs in the self-exile of Jesus on the cross is not his blood sacrifice, it is his transformation, which is the goal of all vision quests, to ultimately so transform the person that he became the two-spirit Messiah that in our tradition we always understood. There are not two genders in Native tradition. There are more than two genders. The world we're now learning is made up of much more complexity than the West ever thought possible. And the neat little binary ways that Westerners have always been trained and taught that this is all that is reality suddenly is starting to fragment, isn't it? It's catching up to Native America, where we understood the two-spirit person that, as St. Paul in one of his moments of awareness said, in Christ there is no male or female. And a Native traditionalist would say, hallelujah, glad you got it, Paul, that's exactly right. Because the quest that Jesus was on was to reach the person who was the farthest gone into the void. Listen, the most marginalized, the most abused, the one who suffered from sexism, the one who has suffered from homophobia, the one who has been marginalized by class or by color. You understand what I'm saying? To hold the people, the okla, the people together, to maintain kinship, to keep equilibrium, to make the balance between males and females and children and elders and everything work in that gyroscope of God's economy, of God's holy native understanding of life, meant that Jesus had to go so far into the void that not a single person who had ever been abused in their life, forgotten, denigrated, spit upon, like he was before he went to the cross, would be lost. No one would be lost. His movement on the cross is the embodiment, the enfleshment of the great sacrifice we must all make in order to defeat racism and homophobia and sexism and every form of cruelty and abuse to any form of life on this planet. When Jesus came out of the tomb, it was not that Jesus died for your sins and if you will believe in him, you'll get to go to heaven too. What a narrow vision. The lucky few who will grab the coattails at the ascension and go with Jesus to your private heaven. That's the big message. Not for Native people. No, when he emerges, it is the affirmation of life that says that there is not one that has been lost. No person is beyond the pale of God's love. No one is exiled from the tribe of the human beings. There is no man, woman, or child who must ever again doubt that they are the beloved of God, welcomed and needed into the midst of the tribe of the human beings, that their voice counts, their vision counts. We need your vision. We need your wisdom. We need your participation in the life of the planet. For without you we are all diminished. And for you Jesus did die, to affirm you and to support you, not because of your sins, but because of your possibility. Because how beautiful you are in the eyes of the Creator. Well, I won't preach anymore. Honestly, I get so passionate about this, you can tell. Because this message is so, to me, wonderfully liberating and healing. and affirming. And it's all there in the book. It's all there. It's not the special secret wisdom of the Native American gurus of the deserts or the plains. It's the common, everyday, as common as the stones of the earth theology that my ancestors lived with all their lives. And it is there available to every one of us if we will but pick it up and take it and understand it and let it speak to us in our own way. It says that whatever race or color or background you're from, whatever your gender or your age, you are part of the tribe of the human beings. We are all the chosen ones of God. And we live here in this garden, not fraught with sin and shame, but full of pride and hope, with a purpose and with a reason. And we follow a Messiah who's as traditional as Sitting Bull. We follow a Messiah who goes into the kiva, who dances the sun dance, who joins us in our lives every day as a native woman, fully enfleshed and embodied. It's a beautiful native woman. That's the Christ, bringing us messages of hope and healing, all through the vision quests that are there for us to follow. Well, I'll quit, but I really hope this was a little interesting. My book, I don't know. I hope it makes sense to people. It's, it just came out in May, and I've been going around talking a lot about it. I'm glad I got to write it. The funny thing was, I never got to write it till I got out of the church. It was so funny, but the church can wear you out. You know what I'm talking about. It just kept me running and doing things. Finally, when I stopped, I wrote a book. Something I wanted to do all my life, to tell the story. You'll see other books over there if you're curious. I'm a quite eclectic writer and reader, and you'll find parts of the vision that I've had was translated recently onto Facebook for the last 5 years. And it came to me to begin writing meditations. I got talked into being on Facebook, which I'd never been on or wouldn't want to be on. And I didn't know what to do when I got on it. So I started writing a little meditation about that long every day and just put it up there. And if you don't know what Facebook is, it's like the global bulletin board of the cosmos, where there's billions of people on Facebook, and they put pictures of cats and grandkids and recipes, and here we are in Hawaii and all that kind of stuff. I just posted my little meditations. Over 5 years, I posted them every day, and more people came. At the last count, it was close to 10,000 people were reading them. And then I started putting them into these little books. So they're part of my vision, and they're over there. They're not the Four Vision Quest of Jesus. And then there's a novel I wrote, which is part of a trilogy I'm finishing. This is the first of the trilogy. It's called The Bishop of Mars. And it's the story of the future, where this is what I envision church life will be like when we've colonized and are living on Mars. And this is the story of the first bishop who goes to Mars with a ragtag group of people that are now supposed to make sense of religion on the red planet. And so that'll be a part of a 3-part series. And I'm at work now on my next, which is a larger native theology that I'm working on now. I hope will be out next year. And you can maybe look for that. It'll be called Our Land, Our God. And it's a total theology from the native experience. So I hope this was interesting. I don't know. Cliff, do you want me to just quit? They can ask.
What I want to ask, would you like to take some questions?
Well, I don't want to overtime. Just wave at me and I'll quit. Because if you have any quick questions, I want to do this right. I'm a bit of both, in the sense that I think it's archetypal for sure. Jung was right with things like that. There are archetypes, and the quest is an archetype. It's in every culture and every period of history. It's lived out more directly in a way by our communities, but that's not the only ones. It is, I believe, in the Hebrew story of ancient Israel. We can find some hints of this in their maintaining the judges for so long before they jumped to a monarchy. Those judges and their emphasis on prophets and on prophecy. Very often in Native America, it was the person who'd been a quester, who had gone on the quest and returned, that people listened to, because that person may have something prophetic or profound to say. And I'm guessing that there are these older strains of that story that show up later. They want to sort of impute that to figures like Joseph, or maybe to an Abraham or something, that they had that vision, like the vision of the three angels coming to Abraham. There's that sense in which there's a visionary expectation in our heroic people, even if it's a small h heroic for us, that everybody could be one, or a big H, like in Israel, where it might be a Moses or an Abraham. The burning bush, the whole thing with the animals too, for Jesus, me and the crow, Jesus and the dove. These elements are in there for us to find. And it represents some of the ancient understandings in Europe that were there. But like I said, they're in Africa, they're in Asia. Very similar stories sometimes, mythic stories, but well looking at. And remember, I'm not trying to sell you all anything here to say everything you read in native tradition, oh, it was just 100% good and right and you should believe that. Some of the stories, no, some yes. The thing about Jesus is, as a Christian I would say, he came to both confirm and correct everybody's Old Testaments or everybody's stories. Some of the things like human sacrifice, not so good. You know, no, we're going to have to delete that. But other things like closeness to nature or things like that, I think that's absolutely right. Well, I appreciate your all's coming. You honor me on anyone who, whenever I give a talk on a Saturday and anybody shows up, I'm really, really honored. Because think of it's a beautiful day out there, and here you are inside listening to me rant and rave, and I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. You honor me by being here, and I really never take it for granted. I will go over and sign the books if you'd like to have one of them. That's very nice of you. And there's a free will offering, and that was for the Charleston House, which they named at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, where I went to school. They named a building the Charleston House, and its purpose is to promote interreligious dialogue so that people of different traditions will work together. We feel like if ever there's a time when we need to stop drawing lines of hate between religions, this is the time for us to stop doing that, and we need all people of goodwill at the table to send out that message. So that's what the Charleston House is all about. Thank you.